Hello, this is Demographics Decoded with me, demographer Simon Kuestenmacher.
And me, Michael Yardney, property and wealth creation expert. And this is the podcast where we unveil the trends shaping our future. Now, have you ever thought about why more baby boomers aren't downsizing, even though many of them are living in homes that are much bigger than they need? So, Simon, today I'd like to discuss an article you recently wrote in the New Daily about this. It's a bit unusual, but it's an important demographic trend that affects housing affordability, intergenerational wealth, and in fact how our cities evolve, Simon.
Yes, so the idea of downsizing is much overreported and underappreciated in Australia, I would argue.
Well, so whether you're a policymaker, a property investor, a business person, or maybe a millennial waiting for baby boomers next door to you to sell up so you can get in, you won't want to miss my discussion with Simon. So, Simon, there's a couple of common assumptions that as Australians age, they naturally move into smaller homes, freeing up larger properties for others, for young families. But it doesn't seem to be the case, does it?
No, so overwhelmingly, the narrative of downsizing is over-exaggerated. There are, of course, plenty of baby boomers right now who are downsizing, who moved to Noosa and the Gold Coast. This is still very much the case. But overwhelmingly, older Australians tend to stay put. They tend to want to age in their own home. That is very, very crucial to many Australians. And I'm arguing in this piece that we have not been providing our older Australians with enough incentives to actually follow through on the downsizing, because we do know from research that there are plenty of benefits when you downsize, and these benefits extend to the downsizing baby boomers, they extend to the broader housing system, and they extend to the children, the families of the downsizers as well.
Well, I remember years ago as I was studying demographics and learning from your business partner, Bernard Salt, there was the discussion about sea change and tree change and baby boomers moving into smaller homes, less maintenance, nice lifestyle. But clearly it isn't happening at scale at the moment, is it?
Exactly. It is not. And part of this has to do with limitations in the housing stock available, because the downsizing baby boomers, of course, tend to leave on average behind a house in a middle suburb of Australia. And they made their life there. This is where they have their friends, their maybe relatives. This is where they have their spare time activities, doctors, spare time doctors, their doctors, their fitness studios, whatever it is, they're set up. So they would want to downsize in the same neighborhood. And unfortunately, there isn't enough suitable downsizing stock pretty much next door available to them. Partially, the boomers have themselves to blame there because they were pretty good NIMBYs and they blocked development in their local neighborhood. But so now they are, if they want to downsize, they have to completely uproot themselves. You could argue that this is actually a good time in the life cycle, just after retirement, to uproot yourself, because, you might want to reinvent yourself one last time. And you could then change your location, finally move to a area that you couldn't move to before, even though you might have wanted it because your work kind of shackled you to your destination, or your kids shackled you to this destination. Or maybe you want actually to move closer to your own children and grandchildren as tag-along grandparents, if you will. So there might be the motivation to downsize, but it is harder to pull off than we might have wished.
Interestingly, over the weekend, we went away with some friends who've had 4 children. They've all grown up, but they're still in the same home they were in 40 years ago. And they use the excuses that, the kids come over occasionally, the grandchildren. I think it's more than that, though, Simon. There seems to be an emotional attachment with all the years that were there and their children growing up. Does that play much into their decision-making to stay?
Most certainly. A family home is more than just a box to live in. It has all those memories attached to the life of your children, the life of creating a family. These are happier times. These are quite often wonderful memories and constant reminders of happier times. And you would, of course, need to let go of those memories. And you would want to be keen enough to reinvent yourself, to downsize. And many people are not. And I'm not saying that everyone must downsize. That would be silly. We very much want to live in a society where everyone is free to choose where they want to live and where there are enough opportunities for people to actually decide proactively where they would want to live. That is something that we must proactively strive for. But we do also want to take into account all of those bits of research, of knowledge that we gathered over the decades, where we can actually say, well, data suggests that downsizing can be rather beneficial for the individual downsizers, because ultimately what we do give you once you downsize, yes, you let go of the memories to a certain degree. But that also means you need to come to a certain kind of reckoning with your own past. You need to actually get rid of most of your crap. So if you downsize, you probably let go of 50% of your belongings.
That's interesting, Simon, because a number of our friends are in that position at the moment, and that's the big barrier for the men, not the women. But the couple of male friends I can think of just off the top of my head, as you said that, they're saying, where am I going to put all my stuff? All the stuff that's in my shed, all the stuff that's in my garage.
Exactly. And if you look at the shed, if you were quite honest and you just magically had an app that told you this, when was the last time you used the item? You will have plenty of items in your house that you haven't touched for a decade. And these things can all obviously go. But you never know if you once again might take up skiing after a 50-year hiatus, and then you still need the old skis. You never know whether these old cans or tins
It
of
may
paint.
just come into use sometime, Simon. I may need it.
Exactly. And same with a wardrobe. What share of your wardrobe do you actually use?
Yes.
And there's data out there that says it's a minusculely small share, and letting go of this actually frees you up because your stuff holds you back. It kind of ties you in. There's a certain kind of freedom that you can create when you let go of stuff. Also, it kind of forces you to actually reevaluate what you actually care about. And what it comes down to is ultimately you don't care about your stuff. Ultimately, you do value your family, your relationship, and probably your own spare time. And just having a large house, having vast amounts of stuff actually frees you up to do other things. And to a degree, you need to be comfortable with this because it can be uncomfortable realizing that you don't have too much busy work anymore. And you
Yes.
then come to this whole reinvention narrative again. What do you want? I recently spoke at the Retirement Living Summit in Australia, wonderful event. And in order to prepare for this, I did spend hours and hours watching influencers on Instagram. And I'm not talking about young bikini-clad influencers or anything like this. We're talking about the baby boomer women in the US that essentially sell you on the idea of downsizing. An absolutely fascinating YouTube rabbit hole to go down into. And it's just quite freeing that the stories that people tell you about not being weighed down by all of those belongings that you accrued over the years. And that's something I would say you would actually want to make sure you make use of in your retirement. Ideally in your early 70s to mid 70s, both partners are still alive. You're still healthy enough to undertake these projects because it is a lot of work. You probably own tens of thousands of individual items in your house by now, and you need to get rid of them. There is a certain kind of challenge here, though, because the generation that is now meant to downsize, the baby boomers, are, of course, the cohort that was brought up by a generation that lived through the First World War, Second World War, that saw a Great Depression. And so they kind of told their baby boomer kids that it is very important to value all of those belongings, that it is it's a big privilege to own all of those things. And they know what it is, what it feels like to go without those things. And so, in a sense, many baby boomers overcompensated and they value their belongings a bit too much. And you then go down to their children, the millennials, born in the 80s and 90s, who actually do not care about their boomer parents' stuff. They just see this as a annoying task once mom and
Yes.
dad die, that you need to get rid of all of this stuff.
Now, that's the emotional side. But Simon, as I see it from the property side, there are some financial disincentives. Fortunately, there's no capital gains tax and a lot of, when you sell your family home, and a lot of baby boomers have actually paid off their home. So they've got a lot of equity. They don't have a mortgage, but there's stamp duty when you buy a new property, your new home. And that's actually quite a big barrier. Do you see financial disincentives as being part of this complex decision-making process?
Absolutely. So if I am the government, so to speak, and I wanted to ensure that more people within the system can right size, meaning baby boomers can move into a smaller dwelling that gives them less stress, less cost, gives them more time, frees up financial assets for them. All the while I create more space for families to move into. What can I do? As a government, I can't tell people how wonderful this is. This is pointless. People make up their own damn minds. So that is what government can't do. But government can create certain kind of financial incentives. So you could consider what kind of stamp duty, discounts could I grant to downsizing baby boomers? What
Well,
exactly this
just
would
like
look
there's
like?
a first homeowner stamp duty concession, it would make sense to me to have a concession, maybe no stamp duty for your last property. If you abuse it and you do it again, then there must be some way of getting it back or paying a stamp duty if you do it
Exactly.
again.
So
But that makes a lot of sense to grease the wheels of industry, make the market move.
and the market would love this, of course, if you ultimately minimize the amount of time that people spend in each dwelling, not too crazily, but just shorten it a bit. That allows right sizing of the market. That means we utilize the homes that we do have better, because in Australia we always talk about the 1.2 million homes that we are going to build allegedly in no time at all. We won't do this. This will not be achieved. So then to help the housing market, we want to find incentives to utilize the existing housing stock a bit more efficiently. And this would be one of those things. So, tweak stamp duty in some way or form. I'm not the best expert to ask here what exactly to do here, but that's an obvious lever. Another one would be the pension asset test. That's the idea that you do not want to sell your house because you then all of a sudden look rich, or you become rich on paper, and then your pension gets cut. And people don't want this. And so this, of course, leads to this bizarre situation where we have countless of widows on rather meagerly pensions living in a $2 million house. And that makes no sense whatsoever. Granted, her millennial kids might be okay with it because they go like, yeah, whatever. She just scrapes by there in this house. And once she dies, we'll sell the house, and the 2 or 3 kids, they will divide the profits. But ultimately, this isn't serving the retiree in their best. But of course, again, this is probably it's largely a lady, the widow there, because she's younger than her husband. She has longer life expectancy than her husband. And she very much became part of the local community. She knows her neck of the woods. If you wanted to incentivize her to downsize, you can set all the financial incentives you want. If there isn't a suitable dwelling pretty much nearby, it won't happen.
Well, that's another factor. So apart from the financial, most baby boomers don't want to move into tiny apartments, as I said. They want quality accommodation, but they also require them in walkable communities. And as you said, Simon, they want to be in the same community, go to the same hairdresser, the same doctor, the same dentist. But the housing stock doesn't seem to be meeting their expectations. What's holding developers back from this? I mean, the right sizing is the fancy word we use nowadays rather than downsizing. What's holding developers back?
Part of this had to do with local councils in the middle suburbs where baby boomers are now aging in, blocking development. And the reason, we discussed this before, we did not incentivize any local government to actually push development through, because as a local councillor, whatever development you push through, someone in your community will hate it. And so you go, well, it's easier than to just say no, to block developments. And then if it's really important, the courts, they force you to build it. And then you can wash your hands clean as a elected official and say, well, I wanted to block this, but the evil bureaucrats are there. They forced it through. So that's a mistake. And to be honest, the states are now taking more and more control. We see this particularly in New South Wales and in Victoria, where these states snatch power away from local government and they enforce very strict housing targets on the local government areas. This has mostly to do with the middle suburbs of our big cities, because on the urban fringe, there are no neighbors to complain. So growth always occurred on the fringe. Also, the inner cities of our big cities, they look like New York, full of skyscrapers. We kind of got okay with the concept of density in there, but it's the middle suburbs that are bizarrely underdeveloped, where we have bizarrely low population density from an urban planner's perspective. And so you go, well, you'd want to increase density there, and you now pretty much take the opportunity away from local governments to say no. That would then push through relatively high density developments. We're not building 20 tower skyscrapers all over the shop, but we are building decent medium density because we can, and it is more profitable than to build yet another family home there. And so ideally, I would suspect that quite a few of those dwellings, because they are relatively expensive per square meter, will be snatched up by retiring baby boomers rather than young families.
Well, they will be relatively expensive for the reasons that you said, the location, the size, the quality of the finish, but there's a market for it because baby boomers in general are wealthy. The annual World Wealth Report, now being brought out by UBS, showed that Australia is again amongst the wealthiest countries in the world. Our median wealth is number 2 after Luxembourg, but it's actually concentrated in the hands of these baby boomers. We've discussed it in previous podcasts before, Simon. They've had more time on their sides, the baby boomers. They bought their homes many years ago and have paid it off and have got substantial equity. So when people ask who can afford to pay those prices, a lot of baby boomers would. I think in the past, though, as baby boomers, we used to think we'll downsize, we'll move into something cheaper, sell up our homes and have money left over. It doesn't sound like there will be a lot left over if you want to move into quality accommodation, right sizing in the same location, will there?
Exactly. So this is part of the reason why baby boomers are a bit cautious, because the idea, it must be a home run. This whole thing is like you sell your big fat family home. Let's call it, $1.5 million you pocket for it. Wonderful. But you then need to live somewhere. And it's not that you can find a $500,000 apartment that would then be in the same neighborhood. It will be reasonably expensive. And so then you go, well, there's a lot of effort of doing this. Is it really financially worth it? Oof, who knows? And so you just make it too easy to second guess it, because it's not as simple as sell the house for 1.5 million, buy a nice 2-3 bedroom apartment for $500,000. These apartments are much more expensive if your house has that value. So the money that you free up doesn't feel all that much, and it probably isn't all that much. And so I would suspect that without additional financial incentives, more baby boomers will procrastinate with the downsizing. And that, of course, always leads to the risk that the downsizing move will be forced upon you rather than that you do it out of your free choosing. And that's then when you're being moved, so to speak, into an aged care home after the second fall, if you will, so forth. And that's dangerous. And we do also know that this is absolute poison for your mental health. So the real trick with downsizing is that you maintain full control over your life. That is absolutely crucial. So therefore, I'm always saying, make this decision as a couple while you're still active and healthy, in 60s, early 70s, mid 70s, and then set up your life there. And maybe later on, you'll have to move to an aged care facility. But usually, once you downsize, you move into an appropriate apartment, you actually prolong the amount of time, statistically speaking, that you can live independently. And that would be very, very welcome, because ultimately that's what the baby boomer generation in particular values: independence, be in full control of your life.
Sure, they're not in a hurry to go into retirement villages, but what are the consequences of them not downsizing, Simon? I'm not talking about the emotional or the family ones, but within the property market, who's missing out when family homes don't turn over?
Well, who's missing out are the kids of the baby boomers, the millennial kids who are right now making babies, making families. And they then, of course, need bigger houses. And because the family-sized dwelling stock in the middle suburbs, in nice commutable distance to the CBDs, is locked up by empty nester baby boomers, that means the millennials have to move far away to the urban fringe and buy houses on the greenfield development sites. That increases the distance between millennials and their kids, so the grandkids of the baby boomers. And
Yes.
so that's probably not desirable, because most baby boomers say they do want to have an active role in their grandkids' life. Maybe they don't want to be the daily taxi service dropping kids off at childcare or kinder or school or something, but they do want to be involved. And if they live too far away, because we have those gigantic cities in Australia, they will see them less frequently in many cases. So that's something that ultimately baby boomers tend to not want to live through. So you'd want to figure out, well, how do we set this up? How do we make sure that we can be an active part of our grandkids' life? And how can we help our kids to make this a bit easier. And that of course needs to be a proactive decision. Of course, also we did one reason we haven't mentioned yet why baby boomers don't downsize is that more and more baby boomers are knowledge workers. So that means they have jobs that they can easily do well into their 70s. At least they can remain on in some sort of like consulting capacity, 1 or 2 days a week. And so as long as you are still linked to your place of work, even if it's just a tiny bit, you go, why would I downsize? Why would I change things up? I'm still active and working. So in your head, you haven't really retired. In your head, you have not reached the stage of the life cycle where you might consider downsizing. So therefore, we just don't act on it.
Now, Simon, a moment ago you explained about the hours and hours of research you did before you gave that talk to the retirement community. Now, I'm going to ask you a couple more questions about our main topic of discussion today, but maybe you could just explain to our listeners and our viewers what you do and how you help your clients, because I know you put a lot of research and you don't just top up on the stage or present to them.
Exactly. So at the demographics group, all we do every day is to really try to understand demographic data in depth. And then on stage or in this podcast as well, I try to show the audience a particular slice of the world through the demographic lens. There's always much, much more to any kind of topic than the demographic angle, but self-serving narrative, I claim that the demographic story always plays some sort of role. And we help audiences to understand this and therefore to understand their own audience, their own issue, their own world a bit better.
I'll leave a link in the show notes of how people can get onto you through the demographics group and see if you can assist their businesses, their organizations, their institutions. Now, having said that, I know you also do consult to government and government bodies. Do you think governments understand all this? I mean, their job, in my mind, in part is to provide the right sort of accommodation or assist in developers providing the right sort of accommodation. Are they relying on outdated assumptions of how we age and where we want to live?
Well, I think governments they have access to all the data. So they should be able to just make very, very pragmatic policy decisions. So that's I think what should be the case. But ultimately, governments make political decisions. Ultimately, the goal is always to want to be elected. And so you go, well, what's the incentive here? One of the negative aspects of encouraging more baby boomers to right size, and see that how I phrase this as negative. One of the negative aspects is that this might drive down house prices. Because ultimately, if you better utilize the existing stock, the value of new dwellings goes down a tiny bit or doesn't grow as fast. And that's a problem, politically speaking, because ultimately, 3/4 of voters own their own home or have a mortgage on it. So they want their biggest asset to go up in price, which is the main reason why housing is unaffordable in Australia, is that we created a system that drives up prices because it is politically a convenient and easy win. And so if you'd said, well, there is a policy that uses housing stock better, that has a negative push on house prices or a downwards push on house prices, that's not very convenient because still people want their asset to go up in value. So I hope that Slow kind of answered your question and showed how cynical I am about housing policy in this country.
So what one policy change would actually shift the needle on downsizing rates?
I'd say kill the stamp duty, pension
Yeah.
asset test, boom. That would make it much more financially juicy to downsize. And you then have people downsize at scale. You'd have people move in. One of the things that we are not solving with this is the distribution of the divergence of Australia into winners and losers, into asset-rich and asset-poor cohorts. Because the baby boomers that can downsize are usually people that own their own home. And then they give money to their kids. They can also own their own home. That's all wonderful. That's a positive intergenerational wealth transfer there for the asset owners. But if you are a non-asset owning family of baby boomers, there are also baby boomers who do not own their own home. You'd say, well, for them, downsizing would make sense because they don't need to pay stamp duties or anything in downsizing, and they just have lower costs. That's actually a no-brainer if it is suitable. But
If they can find accommodation.
they can find accommodation if they feel up for it, because it is also just a nuisance to move. And it's always more convenient to not move than to move in the individual short-term moment.
So, Simon, if a baby boomer came to you and said, "Look, I'm thinking about downsizing, but I'm not sure," what would you tell them to consider?
First and foremost, because you deal with an individual human being there, I'd say, well, tell me about your retirement. What do you actually want out of your retirement? What's your goals here? And then quite often people tell you about long-held passions, desires, travel plans, and you go, well, look at this. There's a way that could free up capital to do this. And you do need to know that if you're in your late 60s and early 70s, do all of your travel desires right now. Do not hold back, because your health, statistically speaking, declines. You will probably not be the one exemption of the rule who is running marathons at 99 years of age. There's always one of those
Yes.
persons out there, but ultimately you won't be that person. So you must make sure you use this last hurrah, so to speak. And so you need to understand the individual goals, and you establish a bit of a profile then of the person, and that would then probably lead them to come up with a bit of a proactive plan.
Well, Simon, from what I understand, from what you've taught us, downsizing isn't just about how many square meters, but it really is about lifestyle, identity, community, and the kind of housing we make available for older Australians. You've shown us that I guess we can't just expect baby boomers to shuffle quietly into apartments and leave their family homes behind. We need to create the right kind of housing options, give them the right incentives, and rethink how we support people moving through this stage of life. But Simon, I think if we get it right, we can free up more homes for younger families, reduce pressure on the housing market, and help our cities evolve smarter and in a more sustainable way. So for those listening to us or viewing us, thank you for once again joining us for Demographics Decoded. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please share it with a friend. Our readership and our listenership, our viewership keeps increasing. I'm really pleased, Simon, how our podcasts are ranking very highly on Apple Podcasts and on YouTube and Spotify. So if you don't currently subscribe, click the subscribe or follow button so you get future episodes. And Simon, I look forward to catching up with you again next week for some great insights into the trends shaping our future.
Fantastic. Very much looking forward to next week already.
This Demographics Decoded podcast has been brought to you by Metropole Property Strategists. We provide a complete range of services to help our clients safely create intergenerational wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you're looking to buy an investment property or your next home, why not have a discovery chat with one of our wealth strategists? Just go to metropole.com.au and explore your options. You'll find we're much more than just another buyer's agent. We provide a complete range of services, including property advisory, wealth advisory, home buying, buyer's agency, property management, renovations, and development management services. The team at Metropole will help you with frameworks that I've fine-tuned over 5 decades, and we've been helping clients with for well over 25 years. We're big enough to tip the scales in your favour, but still small enough to care. In between these Demographics Decoded shows, you can follow me on social media, and I suggest you also follow Simon Kuestenmacher. You'll find him regularly posting on all social media platforms. And thanks for spending the last little while with Simon and me. I hope you got some benefit from the show. And if you did, and you know somebody who may also benefit, please tell them about Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you're definitely going to be doing us a favour, helping us in our quest to make as many people as possible aware of the demographic changes that are going to be shaping their future. And of course, if you don't currently subscribe, we'd love you to. And of course, any of the information that we've been sharing with you is general information because we don't know your specific circumstances.